Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Able Voices podcast. I'm Dr. Rhoda Bernard, founding managing director of the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education and the assistant chair of the music education department at Berklee College of Music. And I am proud to present this podcast featuring disabled artists and arts educators. We are inviting disabled artists to be guest hosts for the Able Voices podcast. Our next guest host and today's guest is Tara Allen. Tara Allen, she, her, identifies as a queer, neurodivergent, and disabled music psychologist, music educator, advocate, and bass clarinetist. She holds a BM in instrumental music education with concentrations in instrumental wind band and bass clarinet from the Crane School of Music and an MA in psychology of music from the University of Sheffield. Her master's thesis, "The Bees Are Too Loud, ADHD'ers Sound Preferences as an Aid Daily Task Completion," focused on how ADHDers use sound and/or music to help cope with completion of mundane tasks and the combined social hardships. Her research areas of interest are neurodivergent and music perception and cognition, learning, processing, behavior, and accessible music education. She has been advocating for neurodivergent and disabled musicians through a variety of platforms since 2020. She has a podcast, Breaking the Third Wall in Music, that invites disabled and/or neurodivergent musicians to discuss disability topics in the music scene. She has spoken on the Brave New Sound and marching arts education. She has also given talks at universities, conferences, and organizations about neurodivergence. Lastly, she is a bass clarinetist and an active performer in a variety of contemporary, classical, and popular musical ensembles. Welcome, Tara. We're delighted to have you as our next guest host of the Able Voices podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhoda. I'm so glad to be here to facilitate and have this discussion today.
Terrific. I'd like to start off by asking you to tell us your story as an artist. How did you get started as an artist, and how did you get to where you are today?
So very interestingly, I was lucky in the sense that my dad's family is very musical. So I grew up with my grandfather and my dad and that family always playing guitar. So they're all guitar players. None of them could read music, which is totally okay. And they all learned music by ear. So I kind of grew up surrounded in music in that way. And it kind of had inspired me to want to do it myself. And then when I started taking music classes in elementary school, I was like, oh my goodness, I really love this. When I was in second grade, I joined choir. I loved that. My mom makes some funny, fond memories of me being like, oh my goodness, it was atrocious, but it was cute, so it was worth it.
I like that. It was atrocious, it was cute, and it was worth it.
Yes. And then in third grade, I remember my high school band director kind of coming in for this instrumental petting zoo. So my high school band director, Mike Nestoriak, and then also what would come to be my elementary band music teacher, Jolie Yeto. You know, they were like, hey, here's all these musical instruments. And I was like, oh my goodness, I really want to play one of those. That looks so fun. And I remember essentially sitting in the music room and with other students. My three top choices were the trombone, the saxophone, and the clarinet. I remember thinking the trombone was so fun, so it was definitely like my second top choice. I was like, this is so fun, this slide, I love this. The saxophone, I immediately was like, don't know about this one. And then I decided and I landed on the clarinet. I just liked how it sounded. Within about a month or two of playing the regular clarinet, I again met what eventually became my high school band director, Mike Nestoriak, and him and Miss Yeto basically had a conversation of like, she should play the bass clarinet. This is like in fourth grade. And I remember them bringing it to me and me being, wow, this thing is bigger than me. And I was just a tiny little fourth grader with her bass clarinet, and I remember honking it and going, this is the best thing ever. I want to play this immediately. And I switched over to bass clarinet. And I can say I haven't touched a regular clarinet since then. Bass clarinet is definitely my main instrument. And then after that, I kind of just did years of elementary, middle school, and high school bands. So I played at I did a NYSMA solo every single year. I think I did like 3 level 6s at one point. I did all types of like performing. I played in the community bands. I played in the Plattsburgh. So the Plattsburgh State University has like a wind ensemble. I played in that when I was in high school. I played in Straw Hatters Community Band. I was always playing in like area all state and like all types of state level ensembles. One in particular that I remember in middle school when I made area all state for middle school for the first time, I was just like, we played the piece Foundry by John Mackey. And I remember that was the moment that I said, I want to do this forever. And I did, obviously. I wouldn't be here talking otherwise. So that piece for me is like very influential. And yeah, so when I was at the end of high school, I was auditioning for the Crane School of Music. I got into Crane. They lent me a bass clarinet, which was great because I really couldn't afford one. And then I went to Crane and did my bachelor's in music education. And it's very interesting because saying that, a lot of people would anticipate that I immediately was going to go and be a music teacher, which I did for a while. But at the end, I was like, I love this, but this doesn't feel entirely like what I want to do, like maybe partially, but not entirely. And at the end of my journey at Crane, I was kind of like, music therapy, question mark? And I talked to the music therapist that was on campus, and I was like, well, not quite. Not quite there. Not entirely. And it's really funny. After I had this conversation with her, I went through the process of looking through some of my really old books. And I realized I had a book called The Musical Mind by John A. Sloboda, which is an absolute music psychology classic.
I know that book. I studied it. It's a fabulous book.
Beautiful book. Recommended to literally anyone who's starting off in music psychology. And I purchased that book when I was 11 at our local bookstore, and I never read it. I pulled it out of my closet, and I was like, what is this? And then I read the whole book top to bottom. I was like, whatever this guy's doing, I want to do this.
Cool.
And then that was when I connected with bass clarinetist Sarah Watts, who works at the University of Sheffield, who's also a bass clarinetist. And she's like, we have a music psychology program. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. So I went there, got accepted, and I studied music psychology at the University of Sheffield. During my time there, I also played in Sarah's bass clarinet ensemble and a variety of other ensembles in the UK. And I also taught music while I was studying and after I studied. So I taught GCSE music, primary and secondary music for 3 years, the 3 years that I was there. And then I was kind of like, well, it's kind of reaching the end of my visa. What do I do? And then I saw this job posting that I currently work at on a Discord server, hilariously enough. And I went, that looks like something I would do. And now I work at Berklee. So it's definitely been quite a bit of a journey as an artist, as a musician, and just all of those musical identities that I have for sure.
So thank you for that fabulous story. Just to underscore something that I love about it, it was one of these, it feels like you had a series of these kinds of moments where you encountered something like, hey, I want to do that. So there's something really powerful about knowing that. Also, there's something really powerful of like, I'm doing this thing, in this case for you, it was teaching, that like lights some of the light bulbs, but not all of them. Like, okay, I feel a connection partially, but I don't feel fully engaged, fulfilled, activated, optimalized, whatever word we want to use, right? And to know that and say, okay, this is cool for now, but this is not the thing. And I'm going to figure out what the thing is, I think is a really powerful experience that a lot of people don't have. So I think that's really great.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of folks, when they are in that process of that, they kind of push it down to the ground, they ignore it, and they're like, I'm just going to keep doing this thing. And I always tell people, like, if you have a feeling, it's probably for a reason. And it's worth the risk in a lot of cases because it could lead you to something really great. I mean, my instance is working at Berklee. I never thought in a million years that would happen, but I just kept taking risks, and you never know until you do so.
Awesome. So next question. Can you talk about your experiences as a disabled and neurodivergent artist?
Of course. So I've had a lot of both positive and negative experiences. Some of the positive experiences, I'll speak to that first. I think like working at Berkeley has been a part of that big positive experience. I get to work with neurodivergent students who are also artists, and I can help guide them in ways that I never received. So I experience that as like a very positive thing. I also think now reaching a point of 5 years of diagnoses that I feel a sense of pride and identity, and also like a sense of like the ability to share with my community about these experiences as an artist. So for instance, like coming up, I'll be speaking with the International Clarinet Association about neurodivergence and neurodivergent clarinet players, which is something I would have never imagined in a million years. So that's very positive for sure. Some other positive experiences that I think about is like, I don't want to say my neurodivergence is a superpower because I think that that's a mildly ableist mindset,
Thank
but
you for saying that.
but it does give me skills that other people don't have, which, I can acknowledge for sure, but it's not a superpower. Like, for instance, I have a photographic memory. So, like, if I lose my music, in some cases, I can kind of see it in my head, right? There are other negatives in the sense of, like, auditory processing sometimes is not the best. Sometimes my finger dexterity isn't as fast as my colleagues when I'm performing or like when I'm reading. So it's really dependent on the situation and a variety of things. And I acknowledge skills and that there are some things that I might struggle with. More so in the negative aspects, like it's difficult because a lot of folks whom are of other marginalized identities, they get late diagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed, or at least didn't start any diagnosis process until I was 21. So I went through the majority of my undergraduate not knowing. And because of that, there was no support services because a diagnosis was required for this support service, right? So I didn't really receive the help that I needed, but also in that sense, I also experienced a lot of discrimination from my professors, my colleagues, and a variety of other things because there's just no knowledge. And even when I was diagnosed, that was something that still continued because the music industry itself doesn't have enough knowledge about disabled artists and neurodivergent artists, or they don't know about identity and culture or the personal lived experiences of people with these identities. And like, there's a lot that I can think about. Like I've had altercations with professors where I was told, quote, someone like you will never be a good music teacher. I was told this as a part of my mentoring and training. There's just like a variety
Horrible,
of things that
horrible.
I've been told over my life. Through that process, both prior to diagnosis and after diagnosis. But I think the difference now is that I'm very prideful of my identity. When these instances occur, I kind of have that courage to basically be like, you're wrong. You are
Yeah.
just incorrect.
And you're also now in a job where you are actively working to change that in one institution and more broadly, which is great.
100%. And, I always tell other disabled, neurodivergent musicians and folks, like, it cannot get better unless you say something or you speak out about it. You know, neurotypical and or holistic non-disabled perceptions of our identities and things is not up to them, it's up to ourselves, and so is our own narratives. And I think that that's really important, especially as an artist when we work in such a creative industry, right? Like our music and our artistry is going to look different. The way I'm going to stim when I perform, I used to get mocked for that. I will stim when I perform openly. I perceive music differently because of my neurodivergence.
You bet.
And I think that those are different ways of adding to that creative industry. It's not something to be frowned upon, it's something to be cherished and accepted, but also to be prideful of.
Thank you for that. Beautiful. So I had a separate question about your education, but you answered that beautifully in your journey. So now we get to go to the music that you have to share with us. Can you tell us about what we're going to hear?
Yeah, of course. So, this piece of music that I wrote, I'm not much of a composer, but sometimes I do like writing music about my neurodivergent experiences because sometimes it's actually really difficult to explain in words what those experiences are like. This piece of music is called Help, Where's the Way Out? It's a piece of music that was actually written during the early processes of my diagnosis with complex PTSD. At the time, I didn't really understand what was going on. And when I was being referred for a diagnosis, I didn't know how to explain it to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And the piece of music basically portrays like what that internal head experience is like. So you can kind of like throughout the piece, you can kind of, it sounds like my heart is beating. You can kind of hear like the thought that is reoccurring, like what has triggered the sensation to occur. You can kind of hear it as like a reoccurring motif. And throughout the song, what happens is that it essentially, you'll hear it kind of like fluctuate where like things will come in, but then it'll come back. And you'll hear parts of it kind of like tip off, or like dissociate out. It's kind of like in an evolving of like remembering the thing. The bass clarinet part is actually me playing, and it's essentially a portrayal of like my emotions and the cognition that I'm experiencing while this episode is occurring. So I kind of see it as like a auditory way of explaining something that is very difficult to explain to others in words because everyone's experience with it is very different.
Thank you for that. So tell us again the title.
It's called Help, Where's the Way Out?
So let's take a moment and listen to Help, Where's the Way Out? So, Tara, you've talked about your training as a music psychologist all the way back to when you were 11 and picked up this book that people don't usually read until grad school. Can you tell us about the research that you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So I guess I should start from the beginning, early stages of my relationship with research and music psychology that was subconscious and I didn't realize was happening. So when I was in my undergraduate, I actually did a lot of research about dyslexia and body percussion and phonetics and language, and primarily how that connects in the elementary music classroom. So I did a lot of research about how music educators can actually use music and sound to connect to phonetics in the classrooms to help dyslexic learners in both the sense of physical movement and then also trying to think of the word of like pronunciation and phonetics, which can be very difficult for dyslexic learners. There's a lot of misconceptions about dyslexia. One of them is
Yes.
definitely like dyslexia is just a reading-based disability, but in a lot of cases it's not. It is sensory and fine motor skills as well. So in this case, this type of music education actually emphasizes all of those aspects of dyslexia and struggle that especially a child might be struggling with. I did a lot of research and I also presented at NAFME with a poster about this project. So I studied mostly like the cognitive aspects and how this can be applied in the classroom. When I went to the University of Sheffield, as kind of alluded earlier, I realized, yes, I definitely wanted my niche area to be neurodivergence and music research. And I was very interested. So when I was a kid, as I said, I grew up in a family of just all neurodivergent people. So I was very interested in learning and understanding, from what I perceived as a child and even into my young adult life was, why does my family just randomly put on music when they're doing tasks? But most people find that overstimulating. Why is that? And I remember talking to some of my family members and they were like, "Oh, I cannot do music. I cannot do a task without having music on." And I was like, "Why is that happening?" A lot of the research that I found was basically, the dopamine theory. Essentially, the brain is not producing enough dopamine, but because music is a multisensory activity, even if you're just listening, it is actually creating and providing dopamine for the brain, which then makes the person feel motivated to do the task. But the interesting part about my research, aside from that cognition, was a lot of participants. So I had about 50 participants in a variety of backgrounds, and they were like, actually, music also helps me unmask in these situations. Because a big structure of what's happening is in these tasks is society's perception of me having to do the task in a specific way within a specific amount of time that's really difficult for me to cope with. And that's like adding a layer of stress that is making it difficult for me to complete this task. But when I put on the music, it's just me and the music, and I can just unmask and take my time, basically. So for them, it was also a social relief in a lot of cases. And a lot of them were like, I didn't realize I was doing this until I took this survey. And wow, I do this. And a lot of them talked about like specific types of noises. So it's really important to know that sound preference is a really important thing. A lot of people are like, oh, classical music. Nah, trash. I love classical music, but no. A lot of the music psychology research actually supports and emphasizes sound preference. And there's a lot of reasons. The biggest one being like our social cognition with the music itself. It creates memories and emotions that then connects to this new thing that you're doing. So in a lot of cases, for instance, like I had a lot of people tell me, and this is when I say some of the research, they were like, white noise only helps. But then when I actually asked participants about white noise or classical music, they said, I find it understimulated and boring. One of the participants even said, white noise physically hurts me. I cannot listen to it. And actually hearing their perspective on that and them saying, I only use this specific kind of music when I'm doing this specific task because XYZ was really important, actually. And this is when we talk about those perspectives of like research and music psychology, not including or asking additional questions rather than just, here's the data. But you can't just be like, here's the data, because then you're actually leaving out the lived experiences of those people that emphasize onto the research.
Exactly. I couldn't have said that better. That's a problem, not just with research, but a big problem in many, many fields. Awesome. Wow. So is there more you want to say about that? But wow, you gave us a lot to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm currently in the process of starting more projects.
You're getting to my next question, which I love. You go.
So I am interested at some point in pursuing a PhD. I have some topic ideas. Like I know that like I'm very interested in autism, autistic folks, and music perception and use specifically. So like for instance, like my top contender for a research project at the moment is how and why do autistic people use music and sound to help immerse themselves into immersive daydreaming states that help them cope with social stress? And there's a lot of cases where I've spoken to autistic people where they go, I've brought this up and they go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that when I start listening to music, I do enter an immersive daydream state. Why is that? Why do I do that? And I'm like, I don't know either. But as a music psychologist, I'm actually very curious as to why that happens. That's definitely like one of my top choices. And I think that it's very niche enough. The other one is definitely like, I'm very interested in psychoacoustics and cognition. So I'm very interested in the timbral, rhythmic, and perceptual differences of neurodivergent and sometimes otherwise autistic folks. And I want to say I don't want to use them synonymously, just because they're not synonymous terms. But yeah, I'm very interested in a lot of the cognitive behavioral stuff for sure.
Awesome. Very interesting. And I can see how the current interests that you have relate to what you were doing in your master's program. Very, very cool. So my last question for you. You've alluded to some of this already, but I want to take a moment. What advice would you give to a disabled artist?
I would say reach out to any resource that you can that you know is led by disabled and neurodivergent people. I think getting yourself in those spaces, even if you don't have a diagnosis, is so important. because those are the people at the end of the day that will always support you, encourage you on. The second thing that I say is like, take it easy. Every day is one day. And especially as people who experience burnout more chronically, make sure that you're taking time for yourself. And, especially as artists and as musicians, like that can be really difficult because we have grind culture. Make sure that you're taking time for yourself. Like that is so important because you cannot perform at your best if you don't feel okay. That's something that we as disabled people have to think about more so, just because we burn out quicker due to our traits and that kind of thing. Also, just as I said, that community aspect is so important because building identity can really help with that as well and having that community. And I guess the last piece of advice I would give is never let someone tell you can't do something.
Yay.
They're just not correct. Do what you want to do because you want to do it. And if you have to find a means that's not that person, then do it. Because in a lot of cases, it's worth the risk. In a lot of cases, they don't have enough knowledge to know how to support you through that. But there are people that will. And I think that that's like really important to know. Feels bad now, but it will get better. But you just have to keep pushing.
Thank you for that. Really great advice. Wow. And what I love about your advice is that you embody it. Your journey, but you took that advice, lived that advice, and still are, which is a beautiful thing to see. Another beautiful thing to see is that we're going to have Tara back as a guest host for upcoming episodes. So I want to thank you, Tara, for your time with us today. And we are really looking forward to the upcoming episodes when you will be the guest host.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhoda. I definitely look forward to guest hosting other disabled and neurodivergent artists on this podcast. And I think that this has just been great to come and talk. So thank you again so much, Rhoda.
My great pleasure. Able Voices is a production of the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education, led by me, Dr. Rhoda Bernard, the founding managing director. It is produced by Daniel Martinez del Campo. The intro music is by Kai Levin, and our closing song is by Sebastian Batista. Kai and Sebastian are students in the arts education programs at the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education. If you would like to learn more about our work, find us online at berkeley.edu/BIAAE or email us at BIAAE@berkeley, that's LEE.edu.